Welcome to the Growth Pod. Today on the podcast, we have Michelle McCarthy, who is a personal brand strategist with 15 years of experience working with everyone from solopreneurs to tech giants. She's developed a personal branding framework that guides women who want more through establishing themselves as the go-to in their industry. With a knack for spotting untapped potential and a genuine desire to spark change, Michelle guides her clients to embrace their uniqueness so they have an unforgettable impact. Her approach is all about keeping it real and aligning personal values with over the top professional goals. Her framework is designed to help powerhouse women launch themselves into the spotlight, selling books, booking keynotes, and becoming established thought leaders. Michelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
I am very excited for our conversation today. It is right at the heart of something that I've been researching a lot lately, and that is the power of personal branding. But before we get started, can you share a little bit about why you're the expert that we should listen to on this topic?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, I have 15 years of brand industry experience. So I started off working in corporate brands and worked in, branding agencies. And then in 2020, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go out and I'm going to start my own branding business. And it was 2020, and like what an idea to do in the middle of the pandemic. But I was like, you know what, I have all this brand and marketing experience. I'm just going to set up my own graphic design agency, and like, how hard is it going to be? Turns out really, really hard. And I thought that I would have all this because I had all like the insider knowledge. I'd be able to like set it up, be a millionaire by Tuesday, set it, forget it, happy days. Unfortunately, it didn't work that way. And I realized how difficult it is to create a personal brand and how different it is from a corporate brand. And so I spent the past number of years researching, doing intensive market research and building my own personal brand, and now building the personal brands of my clients so that we can, as your intro said, step out onto stages, step out of our own way, and have opportunities come to us. Go from invisible to in demand is how I like to package myself.
Amazing. I love that. Go from invisible to in demand. You mentioned that you got your start in corporate and now you do personal branding. And so I'm curious to know, what are the difference between a corporate brand or like a brand that we would be creating for our businesses versus a brand that we would create for our own self?
Oh my God, this is my favorite question. How much time do we have? No, so when you're building a business brand, a corporate brand, you can, and I'm going to kind of like simplify it a little bit, you can essentially make it up. You can decide who you want to be, who you want your corporation to be. You decide on the values, decide on the personality. You literally make it up and curate it. And then you just, so long as you follow that strategy, everything will be right. With a personal brand, it's so much more difficult to do that because, and this is the biggest trap people fall into, is they think that they can just create this quote unquote amazing persona or their alter ego, who they think people want them to be. And it's really hard to do that when you're trying to show up as yourself. So what ends up happening is there becomes this big, like you're butting heads with your inner self, and there's a lot of inconsistencies in it, and it's very incongruent. So the biggest difference is to build a successful personal brand is you actually have to learn to like yourself and know yourself and figure yourself out and then put that out into the world. Whereas with a corporate brand, you can just make it up and just everyone will take you for face value, hopefully.
That's very interesting that you would put it that way. I think that somebody who is studying branding, like you said, they think that they can just make it up, but then it creates this tension. So when you are sitting down to figure out your personal brand, what are some of the elements that you should be including when you're sort of mapping out the brand identity for yourself?
Yeah, so I like to break into 4 parts, and this is kind of how my framework is based. I haven't seen anybody do these 4 parts. I've seen people do 2 or 3, but never the 4. So I break it down into, the first one is your brand strategy. So that will be corporate speak, the brand strategy. For a personal brand, it's what are your values? What are your goals? What are your passions? Like what do you stand for? Who you are? It's the deep dive. It's the stuff that everyone wants to go, yeah, I know that. I've lived with myself my whole life. Of course I know that. The truth is we don't. It's floating around somewhere in that noggin, but we've never took the time to really figure it out and, map it out on what it is that we really, really want and what we stand for. So that is the first section. The second pillar is the mindset stuff. When you're building a personal brand, it is very personal and you're putting yourself out there into the world and it can feel really, really vulnerable. So therefore, getting over the mindset blocks and working on your mind and working on the parts of yourself that maybe you're afraid to be seen, that is huge because then it ties in everything. Once you like yourself, it's, first of all, people are more receptive to your energy. But second of all, you don't mind if you get rejected because it's part of it, unfortunately. So we work through all that mindset blocks. And then the third part is what everybody thinks when they think about branding. And that's what I call the fun stuff. So that is mapping out your personal branding shoot, your colors, your fonts, your Canva templates, a website if you need it, logo. Not everybody needs a logo, but all the fun stuff. What ends up happening is everybody wants to jump into that first, but you need the first two because it's in the first two that you actually figure out who you are, what you stand for, what makes you unique. And then I think of it like a braid, like we start weaving all those bits together. And then we go on to the fourth step, which is when people say grow your personal brand, that's what they mean. It's the growth aspect. It's the pitching. It's the growing your social media. It's the getting you on stage, the getting you the book deals or whatever your goals are. So that's my 4-step process in building your personal brand.
So, within all of these 4 steps, it sounds like there is a lot of work that each step entails. And I'm curious to know, what are the biggest mistakes that you see people making when they're creating their personal brand?
I did this and it's so embarrassing. So it's referring to yourself in either in the third person or like as we. So I mentioned earlier, I set up a design agency, whatever you want to call it, a design studio, branding studio. I say that it was me at my kitchen table in the middle of a pandemic. It was just me on my laptop. Okay. But on my website, it was like, we are a multidisciplinary, like global. It was so cheesy. I thought that seeing myself as a bigger business, people would be more receptive to it. Turns out it's not. People actually like to know the person behind the brand, which is why personal branding is such a trending topic at the moment. So stay away from, trying to make yourself seem more important than you are, or, talk about yourself as a collective. It gets kind of cheesy. And then stop copying other people is the other thing. That's why the first 2 parts of building your personal brand through my framework, sometimes it may look externally like you're not making progress, but you're just going to skyrocket past everybody else because you're going to be so sure of who you are. We're going to have picked out exactly what makes you different, and then we're going to run with it, and it's going to be amazing. That's my whole thing.
I like that a lot. Taking the time to make sure that you're building that foundation for that growth instead of building it and then rebuilding it and figuring out it's not quite right. And that may seem faster at first, but it's actually slower in the long run. I'm curious if you're doing that, you're kind of like doing it in bits and pieces, and maybe you are listening to this and you figure out that, you aren't going in the direction that you should be going. How should people approach rebranding themselves, and how often should you rebrand?
Yeah, this is a great question. First of all, if you are, chopping and changing and kind of bootstrapping it all, like we all do that when we're starting. So I would give yourself some grace. If you want to, I often use social media as an example or like to describe it just because everybody's on social media and people get it. But I do also want to emphasize that like, quote unquote, building your personal brand or growing is not necessarily just your social media, like how you show up. And you can absolutely build a personal brand without social media. So then if people were looking to rebrand, then what I would say is take a pause. First of all, go have some experimentation, see what sticks. That's always fun. But the best thing you could do is actually do a brand audit. So that's where you look at your messaging, how you're putting yourself out into the world, what people perceive of you. It is much better to get a third party to do this for you, because they can actually be objective. And then from there, you can figure out where the gaps are and what to do. In terms of rebranding, my answer for a corporate versus personal are very, very different. A corporate brand or a business brand should look at rebranding every 2 to 5 years. Usually about 2 is a bit of a refresh, and about 5 years they need a little bit of a rebrand. Personal branding doesn't need that necessarily, because again, there is a person behind the personal brand. So everything's going to grow and evolve with you as you grow and evolve. However, I would suggest doing that brand audit maybe every 2 years or so, because it just makes sure that everything hasn't, that everything's still really, really tight, or where there's gaps, or if you're struggling because you've moved onto a new version of yourself, how to bridge that gap. But within a personal brand, the chances of you having to rebrand are far less than when you're in the business world, because it's just naturally growing and evolving as you are naturally growing and evolving as a person.
Interesting. So it seems like rebrand is really something that just kind of like follows you along as you grow and evolve as a person. Whereas with a business, it needs to be more intentional because there's not like one singular person behind it, unless you're a solopreneur. But generally speaking, it needs to be more intentionally done. Um, so that leads me to my follow up question, which is, now you have your brand, you feel really good because you've done all this work to lay the foundation, and you are out in the world. And now you're looking around at everybody else's personal brand and you're like, oh my gosh, am I even going to stand out? Like, what are some of the key steps that people can take to stand out regardless of their industry or how crowded they feel their marketplace is?
The biggest secret of personal branding is literally one word. It's juxtaposition. And what that means is taking something that you wouldn't normally associate and putting it into an environment that you wouldn't normally see it in or associate with it. The key to a personal brand that is going to stand out is finding what your juxtaposition is. So perhaps you work in marketing, but on the side, you love crocheting. Individually, they're not necessary. There's nothing stand out about them. No offense to any of the crocheters or marketers out there, but there's, individually, it's not like, oh my God, that's so quirky. It's like, okay, yeah, cool. But if we meld them together and we really double down on that messaging, maybe your logo has got like a stitch effect, and maybe, I don't know, I'm not into crocheting, but maybe there's some crochet puns we could put, like we could name your services after, your products after. That's how you're going to stand out. That's why the foundation work, that's why it's so important, because we're going to figure out what that thing is for you. I found this really, really difficult because I think of myself as a basic B. I don't think that there's anything necessarily overly quirky about me or overly unique about me, but it's pulling in all those little threads. Again, going back to the braiding metaphor. Oh, okay, you like crocheting, you like marketing, cool. And you love the beach, or you love a cheeky margarita, cool. Like, we're going to weave them in together, and like, there you go. That is going to be the personal brand. But the foundational work really comes in figuring what that is, because it's also not necessarily your hobbies. It might not necessarily be as obvious as, oh yeah, you're really into crocheting. So it's really finding that foundational work. And quite often, the thing that's going to make you stand out is the thing that you have been avoiding about yourself. So this is where it gets really deep and into like the mindset kind of thing. Is sometimes the bit that you're like, oh my God, I really hope nobody knows that about me, or nobody finds that out about me. And you're trying so much to kind of cover this bit up. Quite often that's the bit that's actually going to connect with people. And that's the bit that everyone's going to go like, oh my God, I'm the same. I get her. And that's where you're really going to build that community. So it's the foundational work and the pulling those threads together that's really going to set you apart.
I think that's so interesting. One, I love your braiding analogy. It's not just like one key, it's all of these things that are woven together to create your personal brand, but also the fact that you want to highlight something about yourself that makes you more relatable, even if it's something that you're maybe uncomfortable sharing in the beginning. And it creates this common thread that other people who have experienced something similar or are a similar way, they can relate to you.
Yeah, exactly. I think of, the TikToker Elise Myers.
Hmm.
She's amazing. And but like all her stories are like about how she embarrassed herself and like how she did this, there's one story where she like flew across the country like to meet this guy and he ghosted her at the airport. And like if that was me, I'd be like, I'm not telling anybody that. Oh my God, that's so embarrassing. But like she has millions of followers and everybody loves her. She's a fantastic like case study in vulnerability and being authentic and just showing those parts of yourself to really create connection rather than what we have been doing previously, which is look at me, I'm an expert, I'm so polished and perfect. This is why you should hire me and my team while I sit at my table in my apartment. So yeah, there's a shift and people want to see the behind the scenes. They want to obviously make sure that you know what you're talking about, but there's room for personality, and that's how you're really going to stand out.
I love that. I have one more question. If you are somebody who has a business, but you also want to develop your own personal brand, how do those two things play together? Especially if you are in the stage of your business where maybe you're trying to step back from the spotlight so that can kind of be its own thing for to sell it or for some other business reason. How do those two things play together, and what are the things that you need to keep in mind when creating your brand, but you're also still working for your business, if that makes sense?
Yeah, definitely. I actually just wrote an article for a publication yesterday on this exact topic. So honestly, it does depend on your business and your goals. So if you were to sell it, and depending on what stage you're in, how you're going to do that is going to be very, very different because obviously you don't want anything to come against that sale process. If you're just gearing up to maybe sell it, are you going to be transparent about that? There's different things to keep in mind. But in general, if you've grown a business to a point, it has kind of taken on a bit of its own. Quite often when we start a business, particularly if it's just us, it is kind of an extension of our natural personality most of the time, not always, of who we are. But as it grows and evolves, it moves away from who we are. So a lot of it will be figuring out your goals, figure out your business goals, but then also figure out your personal goals for your personal brand. So do you want to be known as an expert or be a speaker? Do you want to coach people? Do you want to use it to help sell your company? Do you want to use it to get investment for a new company? So that is going to depend, like your goals are really going to depend on your approach. You could start off similarly to how your business is presenting itself, and then you'd slowly transition and amp it up. It really does depend person to person, but I do think it's super, super valuable. It's also almost like a bit of insurance. So regardless of what happens in your business, you also have your own unique personal brand that you can build on the side. And yeah, it opens up a world of opportunity. So I know that didn't answer your question exactly because it does depend on person to person, but I would say everybody should be doing it. Everybody is going to be doing it. And if you already have a really established client base, then I'd be getting on it now because what's going to end up happening is as more and more founders and CEOs and teams lean into this personal brand, if you do it after the fact, it's going to seem disingenuous. Your consumers want to see the person behind the brand. They want to see the team. They want to make sure that your ethics align. There's conscious consumerism, a lot of conscious consumerism, which means people want to make sure that they know, like, and trust the person they're giving their money to. So I would jump on it as soon as possible. But yeah, getting to know your goals and the reason why you want to create a personal brand, and from there build it. And then everything else that I said about getting to know who you are, your personality, and going from there, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's so important. It sounds like the key to everything is really starting with that foundation and understanding not only who you are as a person, but if you are also running your own brand, what the goal is for that, and then just making a plan for moving forward and
Yeah.
what makes sense for
And
you
everybody
and your
wants
individual goals.
Yeah, and everybody wants to skip it. And don't get me wrong, me too. I mean, I'm coming from a graphic design and branding background. And I want to get straight in and do the design things. I want to book my photo shoot. I want to decide on my colors and my fonts. Everybody wants to do it because it's something tangible and it's fun. And if you're a creative, like you'll love it. So it's really, really hard to kind of put a pause on that and go back and do the inner work. But I promise it is so foundational, and it will just springboard the rest, everything else, and it'll make everything so much easier. And I'm not just saying that, I promise you it will. It'll make everything so much easier.
Yeah, it definitely is something that I am realizing that I need to go back to the drawing board and just think a lot more about. I've been doing that for my business and like the persona that we want to be helping, but I'm realizing as we're talking, it's something that I haven't done enough for myself. So I know that there are so many gems in this episode, and I know that you are somebody who is so busy, and I want to know what is next for you.
So next for me is practicing what I preach, I'll be honest. So I have a lot of speaking gigs lined up. I in-person workshops, and I've just launched my coaching program, which is a 6-month one-on-one coaching program. There is a lot of moving parts at the moment. And yeah, it's all go, go, go for the rest of the year.
Amazing. And if anybody is listening and they're interested in catching up with you online or possibly joining your coaching program, where's the best place for them to do that?
So on all socials, my handle is at I'm Michelle McCarthy. That is the easiest way. And then in the bio, there's my link tree, and you can book in a free 30-minute strategy call, a personal branding strategy call. I also offer the brand audits that I mentioned, and there's my coaching program. And yeah, or else just jump in and say hi. I love to make new connections.
Amazing. And if you are listening and you are interested in any of that, all of it will be linked in the show notes for you. So you can go right there and find Michelle. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this episode of The Growth Pod, please leave us a review. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.